folks. Welcome to episode 5 of the Canna Machine podcast, all about the CBD and canna industry. It's a show where I talk to brands, retailers, campaigners, and activists. So whether you're a CBDer, canna curious, or blazing your own trail, then there's something for you here. I'm your host, Gary Canaday, and in episode 5, we talk medical cannabis. I talk to Clark French and Leah Simpson from the United Patients Alliance, or UPA for short. They discuss some of the key obstacles UK patients currently face obtaining cannabis prescriptions and what people can do to help. And I'm here with Clark and Layla from the United Patients Alliance. Thanks for agreeing to talk to me today, guys. Could you just explain a little bit about what the organisation does?
So we're the United Patients Alliance. We were founded in 2014 with the help of Caroline Lucas and Professor David Nutt in Brighton, my hometown of Brighton. We campaign to raise awareness of the benefits of medical cannabis, both in the public and political fields. And we also support patients who currently consume cannabis as medicine and find that they have trouble with the law and have trouble with the stigma. So we're a support group and an advocacy group.
We aim to represent over 1 million patients in the UK who are currently self-medicating with cannabis. We want cannabis, medical cannabis, in the hands of every patient who needs it, no matter what condition they present, no matter how much money they've got.
Technically, the GPs could prescribe cannabis, but they're not prescribing it for a range of reasons.
Yeah. So right now, last year the government also made THC legal, rescheduled cannabis medicines into Schedule 2. So that means that it has medicinal benefit, but there wasn't a process in which patients could access it. There was no clear process. So although a lot of doctors and specialists do want to prescribe their patients cannabis, there's no funding. So all of the clinical commissioning groups, the bodies that decide what funds can be set for different NHS bodies, are saying they can't afford it, they can't pay for cannabis. So although specialists will say, hey, I have a patient that's presenting with a problem that could be helped by this product here, they won't have any ability to prescribe it to them on the NHS because it won't be funded by the CCGs, right? However, a private prescription can be funded. So if a patient can go get a private consultation and then fund the medicine themselves, that they can access cannabis legally from the Dutch government's licensed Bedrocan.
Basically, we're in a situation where if patients can pay, they can access medical cannabis, but if they can't pay, the NHS won't provide it for them.
In what form are they normally prescribing the cannabis? Is it as oil or is it as supplements?
It's as a flower. So this flowers, Bedrocan has, I think they have 7 different strains. That they have the main one, their flagship Bedrocan is a 22% THC dominant, sativa dominant strain, essentially. Yeah. So it's THC.
You could buy a seed and grow it yourself.
Yeah.
What's the situation here?
So essentially growing your own cannabis in this country is still a criminal offence. So you can buy and sell cannabis seeds as much as you like, but as soon as you start to cultivate it, that is a crime. So that is still the situation that we're in currently. A lot of people do want to be able to grow their own, and a lot of patients are growing their own currently and are still facing problems with the law, problems with landlords, problems with their neighbours, like all sorts of different issues that stem from it. And essentially there's no protection for people that are having to do that. And where the NHS is not prescribing, the only way that people are accessing right now is either growing their own or going to the black market. That's it. There's no other routes of access. So it puts patients in a really strange and horrible predicament of, what do I do? Do I carry on suffering, or do I take matters into my own hands and grow my own? As we've seen with Carly's Amnesty, even when a person has a prescription, a private prescription for medical cannabis, if they choose to grow their own, they will still get problems with the law and potentially prosecuted.
So we at the United Patients Alliance are running a campaign called #LetUsGrow, where we think that it is safer for patients to grow their own, to find out what strains are most effective for their conditions and grow their own, rather than relying on the black market, which are the only two choices that most patients have, because we know there are no quality controls. There are, participating in the black market just isn't a good way for patients to access their medicine.
To get a private prescription of Bedrocan is around £600 for 28 grams. So that's £600 an ounce essentially. So that's more than triple the street price for cannabis. So if you want to get a legal prescription, you've got to pay for it.
It's not just the funding that's holding us up as we try to progress towards medical cannabis available for patients. There's also a lot of hesitance from the NHS and the advisory bodies about, they say there's not enough clinical evidence. Well, we speak to patients regularly across the UK who are all consuming cannabis, who have transformative life experiences through consuming medicinal cannabis. I think other countries have recognised it. There's no reason really that's good enough to say that UK patients can't access medicine, whereas patients in other areas of the world can. And them saying there's not enough clinical evidence, well, we know that cannabis doesn't fit neatly into the clinical trial box. It will take centuries for us to do enough clinical trials to appease them. So we need to have a new paradigm shift. We need to approach this issue differently, and we need them to recognise that cannabis is special, cannabis is different, and we need to develop a new way of producing the evidence. And we at the United Patients Alliance, we're trying to work with them to produce some evidence that they can hold up and say, okay, well, this will do, so we can connect our patients with their medicine. It's NICE recently published guidelines that said that there wasn't enough clinical evidence to conclude that cannabis was effective.
Here are the 2 points of resistance. You've got a financial one, which is it's very expensive to prescribe, and then there's a bigger issue with clinical trials.
I would also add another problem in there, maybe Clark has some more, but the stigma around cannabis prevents people from engaging in it, really. And we are starting to see a very interesting point in our society where people of my parents' generation, who would be around their 60s, 70s, they're starting to have friends who are starting to have problems, cancer, Parkinson's, and their friends find out what I'm doing and are starting to ask my parents, oh, well, maybe cannabis can help me. And that, I wouldn't have dreamed that would have happened, but we are starting to see a little shift, I think, a small shift towards cannabis being a bit more socially acceptable. But we have a long way to go, because we're fighting 50 years of prohibition, we're fighting 50 years of misinformation, propaganda, so we do need to do quite a lot of work to inform the public, educate the public about cannabis being a medicine rather than a dangerous, evil drug that will ruin society.
The problem with the body of evidence really is something that we are tackling at the UPA. We've partnered with Drug Science and Professor David Nutt to produce Project 2021. So between us, we aim to get 20,000 medical cannabis patients into clinical trials by 2021, by the end of 2021. We think that this will provide a body of evidence that can be used by NICE, can be used by the government and by the CCGs to show that actually there is real value in prescribing cannabis to people, and that actually it could save the NHS a lot of money. I think that's where I'm personally coming from a lot, because I have MS and I would be on 11 prescription medications that would cost the NHS £30,000 every year if I took them, but I don't. I take cannabis instead, and I'm coming up to 10 years of having MS now, so we're talking up to £300,000 that I've saved the NHS by consuming cannabis instead. Now, the cannabis that I've consumed definitely hasn't cost £300,000, so there's definitely vast savings to be had if used correctly, if it's positioned in a place where it could be a first port of treatment rather than a second, because we know that cannabis is much safer than all of these different drugs that I'm prescribed. Like, for example, I'm prescribed tramadol. If I take too much tramadol, it can kill me. So they'll happily put me on a painkiller that could kill me every single day, but they won't let me have cannabis. Got it upside down, and it's a long old process to really get that to go in the order that it should be. We are on our way. It is happening. It is slow and it is arduous, and it's going to take a while, and patients aren't going to get it when they want it, and we're going to lose people along the way. We're going to have children that are going to not be with us who could be with us if they would move quicker. But unfortunately, that is something we have to accept in this campaign. Otherwise, we can't carry on, because it would destroy us. It's horrible being around people that that actually, if they had access in a regulated way, they wouldn't have died. Several founding UPA members are not with us anymore, and had they had access to cannabis fully in the way that they wanted it, maybe they would still be here. It's a horrible war to be fighting, but that is just what it is. It is a war, and we need everybody to support patient advocacy, because we are on the front line. The patient advocates are the front line of this battle, and we're already sick, already battling our own illnesses, and it's so hard. So we really need people to get behind patient advocacy and to understand that we are doing this so we can get our medicine, so that we can lead better lives, and so that everybody has that same option if they get ill. Medical cannabis does not discriminate. It is for everybody.
The CBD market in the UK has really taken off. It's booming, but CBD is just one small extract out of the plant. And actually there's a bit of misinformation out there that CBD is the medical part of cannabis, which is not true at all. We've heard this from people who really should know better. It's the whole plant. The whole plant is the most medically effective thing. You've got all the terpenes and cannabinoids. CBD is one. So we've got a way to go. It's good that people are becoming more accepting of CBD, because that is a step, I think, towards becoming more accepting of cannabis, the plant in general. But it's not far enough. CBD isn't effective for a lot of our patients. They need THC, like Clark here. So we have a long way to go to make the whole plant available to everyone.
What will happen next 5 years? What will happen next 5 years?
Next 3 to 5 years, what do you see happening?
We're going to see more patients accessing privately cannabis prescriptions, and we're going to see industries developing private prescriptions for cannabis. Where the NICE guidelines have just come out, quite a lot of the other companies that might have invested are now even more hesitant than they were before. The biggest concern I have in the next 5 years is making sure we have a well-funded patient advocacy groups that can really push the message home that cannabis is medicine. I think what is about to happen is that as the big industry moves in, it's going to be the full recreational industry that is getting behind it, rather than the medicinal industry, where they're more reluctant and hesitant because of the NICE guidelines. So I think the UK is trying to kind of run before it can walk. And although, I don't think anybody should be criminalised for consuming cannabis, I think that we need to do this in a proper order and make sure we get the patients off the battlefield first. As we're saying, this is the war on drugs. This is a war, and you don't leave sick and dying people to die out in the cold on the battlefield. You make sure that you get them back home to base. You make sure they're safe, and then you carry on. That's how wars are fought. And to leave the patients just there fighting on their own, I think is going to be the biggest downfall. If we don't get that right, we're not going to get what we want moving forward, and then it actually is going to hold up the entire thing. If cannabis medicines aren't in the hands of patients in the next 5 years, then it's going to be harder for the recreational campaign to argue that they should have recreational cannabis in the hands of everybody. So ultimately, if we want to see changes, we need to ensure that sick people are looked after.
Next 5 years. What will happen?
I think that within the next 5 years we are going to see availability of medical cannabis for a variety of different patients, maybe not for all of the conditions that we'd like to see, but I think we will be in a position where it's more widely available for patients. I think that I agree with Clark that the risk is that patients themselves get left behind, and it's not actually what the patients want, what they need, that is being provided. So even though I mean, look at the global trends, we are heading towards a situation where cannabis is going to be made more widely available, either just medically or recreationally as well. I think that's a global trend. But the fear is that patients aren't going to be heard, and patient advocacy groups like ours are just going to be ignored and defunded, and then we'll be left with profiteers trying to wring the industry dry and the patients maybe still suffering at the sidelines. The United Patients Alliance at the moment are seeking funding. If any of your listeners would like to help us out, we are fairly desperate for funds at the moment. We really want to ensure that the patient voice is at the heart of this whole growing industry, that people are listening to patients, responding to their needs. Anyone could be a patient.
So you can find out more about the United Patients Alliance at www.upalliance.org, and we're all on social media. So we have Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and you just type in United Patients Alliance and it will come up. United Patients Alliance UK on Twitter.
Okay guys, thanks for that. It's great. Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the show. Maybe you got some useful ideas or heard something that inspired you in some way. You can access the show notes for this episode on the canamachine.co.uk website. If you're enjoying this podcast, feel free to subscribe, rate or leave a review. If you'd like to get in touch, then you can reach me at info@canamachine.co.uk. And until next time, stay lucky.